Hey everybody, Lawler here with your recap for week 7 of RLCSX. We've got 2 grids to go through as well as the second regional for North America. Also, before we get into those, there has been some roster changes that are in effect during this weekend, so we'll talk about those briefly as well. And if you have any questions, comments, concerns, make sure you drop those down below and I'll do my best to answer those in a timely fashion. With that said, let's get right into the video. So up first, right before the grid actually ended up going down, it was put out by Soniqs Esports that they will be moving Shock to substitute on their roster. In his place, their coach Roll Dizz would be moving from starting roster from his coaching position and would be competing in the event. They say thank you for their continued support for this season. They don't provide any information as to why this is happening, and there has been some speculation. But ultimately, when I think of Soniqs, I think of Shock. He was the MVP in Season 9. And has continued to show that he is absolutely stellar on the roster. So it's kind of confusing as to why he is being substituted as compared to anybody else. A little bit weird for Soniqs, but we'll have to figure out what that all means in the future. Not necessarily a roster change, but credit to the team known as Continuum. They have been picked up by the organization Down to Earth. A little bit of a spoiler before we jump into it, but despite the pickup, the boys unfortunately were not able to perform all that well this weekend. Jumping over to Europe, we did have Mognus announce a new team. This was on September 15th. He said that he was going to be playing alongside Tossis and Edurf. I don't know how to say his name, unfortunately. But they're going to be going under the name From the Air. Because of that, that does make some changes over to Chalked. If we jump over to Alot's Twitter, a couple days later, he talks about that the roster lock has already happened for the third regional. So they won't be able to sign up, and then it is confirmed that they missed it by 1 day. He also then states that because Mognus has gone to another team, they actually will not be able to compete in the grid. So as you guys see this weekend before we get into it, and I'll reiterate this when we talk about it, Chalked just forfeits their matches because they don't have a third player. And last but not least, if you guys didn't see it, Oxygen now has a coach. Farah, Shazette, and Astral have always kind of relied on Farah's mentality in the game and his coaching ability and the analysis that he provides. But it looks like they're going to be bringing in Moon Phases, who is going to be focusing more on the physical and mental health of the team, which seems to be their biggest issues, especially when it comes to the regionals. So hopefully this is a step in the right direction. Now starting with the recap of the actual matches, going to go in chronological order, starting with week 7 of North America Grid. You can take a look here at Group A and B. Your 4 teams that ended up making it from Group A are going to be G2, Envy, Kansas City Pioneers, and the Peeps. Again, heartbreaking loss for version 1 right away against G2, where they bring it all the way to 5, and they could have had it. They were up 2-1 in the series until they ultimately lost. So again, version 1 shows that they can compete, but just have a hard time closing it out. Space Station does end up dropping early to Kansas City Pioneers, who ultimately loses to Envy before they qualify. Space Station ultimately drops to the Peeps in the lower final qualifier, and Kansas City Pioneers end up 3-0ing version 1. Version 1 tends to struggle against these fast, chaotic teams. And credit to Kansas City Pioneers as they continue to progress and get better and better. Going over to Group C and D, you have got Energy, Pittsburgh Knights, Rogue, and E-United. E-United is one that we've been trying to keep our eye on, ultimately because they did recently put Hockser on the bench and have been starting Tristan, the new hot commodity coming over from CRL. As if you guys haven't seen my latest video talking about this, Tristan is essentially the Justin of CRL, so I know a lot of CRL players are rooting for him, because it is showing that, hey, this guy is just as good as we think he is. We then get into the playoffs where Energy goes the distance against Kansas City Pioneers. Technically, it is 3-3 in the series because they do have a 1-game advantage, but they do end up ultimately winning there and then going 4-0 against Pittsburgh Knights in the semifinals. Pittsburgh Knights did end up beating the Peeps to get there, but had a hard time against Energy. And it does look like Energy is finally starting to find their form. There was a lot of commotion about this over the weekend about how Energy has been trying to figure out what their performance is going to be like with Squishy, how he's going to fit into this roster, what his kind of role is per se. And there's been a lot of focus on bumps and demos, a lot of good defense, but how can he continue to put that through? And this seemed like an early iteration, I guess, is the best way to put it, of what Energy was trying to become. And it precedes really well what ended up happening in regionals, which we'll get to in just a bit here. On the lower half, it was the G2 show as they beat United 4-3. They then beat Envy, and then they go on to beat NRG. So G2, a team that is absolutely dominant, looking really, really solid, and reasons to believe they're going to be moving up in the power rankings based upon how Space Station performs in regionals. Either way, G2 looking really solid. They still, for me, struggle a lot on defense, but when they have that much offense and that offense is that good, it honestly doesn't matter. So again, I think G2 did a really good job this past weekend in the grid and obviously still stayed competitive when it came to regionals, which we'll talk about in just a bit. Unfortunately for Rogue, they did go up against an Envy team that Envy just seems to be more consistent and a better version of Rogue in the first place. I've been building up this rivalry for a long time, but it seemed like Envy has now progressed way past where Rogue tries to attempt to be. So Rogue, I don't know what it is about them, but they have so many opportunities to just be this really solid team, and then they just sometimes fall flat. So a little bit unfortunate for Rogue, but still finding themselves in the quarterfinals is something that they should be proud of. We then progressed to week 7 of the grid for Europe, and this one was pretty exciting. Right out of Group A and B, you saw Monkeys and Singularity both have major upsets, with Monkeys beating Vitality and BDS losing to Singularity, which just caught everybody by surprise. You saw Top Looks beat Dignitas as expected, and then Team Liquid 3-0'd Libertas. Semifinals, Monkeys ended up making it to top 8 yet again, so congrats to them. Monkeys is the team that I cover on broadcast, so a lot of these matches I didn't get to see because I was too busy watching and taking coverage of the Monkeys rather than being able to look at the other sides of the bracket. Top Looks, as expected, again, another top 4 team for me, continues to make it through, and they qualify through uppers also. We then see Vitality and BDS play each other right away in that lower round 1 where Vitality ends up winning, and then Vitality kind of gets the hot hand and continues their path of terror like they always do. 3 over BDS, like I mentioned, as well as a 3-2 victory over Team Liquid. And I think the only reason why Team Liquid ended up being kept out of the top 8 again, Team Liquid having a hard time qualifying because they are running into some of the top dogs when it comes to the power rankings. As for Dignitas, they do end up bouncing back and getting a win over Libertas, but ultimately lose to Singularity, who dropped down after Monkeys and then qualify as well. Over in Group C and D, you do have Barcelona, who gets the free win over Chalked. If you guys don't remember, in the beginning of the video, I talked about how Chalked is forfeiting all their matches moving forward here because Mognus is now playing for a different team and they can't field a full roster. Triple Trouble does beat Solary and then actually moves on to the semifinals to beat Barcelona, which I think is a really big deal. I think part of the reason is because Barcelona didn't really have a warm-up match. They end up dropping down to the lowers, and as we get into the rest of the quarterfinals, Oxygen ends up losing to Giants and Guild beats Endpoint, both games that I tend to expect. But the big shock was the fact that Guild did end up beating the Giants. So Giants ended up dropping down to lowers and having to face Solary, which was an expected win. And Barcelona versus Oxygen. Oxygen is a team that does show up pretty well in the grid, not so much in regionals, and they show exactly here that they can continue to compete, try to replicate that first place spot that they desperately need to make it to the major. We then go into the playoffs in the final bracket where it is single elimination, and Monkeys ends up clean sweeping Oxygen to move to the semifinals. So top 8 last week. This week they end up making it to the top 4, so big deal for them. You look at Top Blokes versus Giants. This was a really close match, but because Blokes has the 1-game advantage, they end up going 4-3. Triple Trouble makes easy work of Team Singularity, and Vitality, again, they drop to that lowers, and you can never count them out. They end up beating Guild 4-2. We then go into the semifinals where the Monkeys just kind of have their way with Top Blokes. Thought Top Blokes was going to give us a different look, and although they did put up a really good fight, Monkeys really hit a stride here and was really exciting because not only do they make top 8 for the first time, but now they're finding themselves all the way in the grand finals. On the other side of the bracket, Vitality, again, talk about hitting that hot hand, just kind of getting the ball rolling. Something about them dropping to lowers just reinvigorates this team, and they look absolutely dominant. They make themselves all the way back to the grand finals after ultimately losing to the Monkeys in the very first round of the group stage. They find themselves in a rematch and sweep them 4-0. Monkeys at this point just did not stand a chance. Vitality played a really slow, methodical game, wasn't afraid to give the Monkeys space, and they just did not know how to adapt to it, and ultimately got the victory. So congrats to Monkeys for making it to the grand finals, but Vitality, again, still on top. Last but not least, we had the North American Regional. We had Stage 1 last week for Group A and Group B, so we're going to jump straight ahead to Stage 2. And in Stage 2, we had our top 16 teams on Saturday. We had Kansas City Pioneers, Energy Esports, Space Station Gaming, G2 Esports, Envy, Peeps, Xset, Alpine, Rogue, Frontline, Pittsburgh Knights, Jamal Jabari, Plot Twist, Adept, Nefarious, and Down to Earth, previously known as Continuum. As you look at the graphic here that the editor has so nicely put up for you guys, you can see the results and the big ones to pay attention to. Number 1, Kansas City Pioneers again goes 3-0. Their hardest match being Rogue, but because of their game differential being absolutely perfect at 9-0 apiece, they do get first seed, so that means they're going to be playing the worst team, and then in this case, the results are with Alpine. So we saw Kansas City Pioneers get a little bit of an advantage here. Energy comes in second, 3-0 their matches, but the fact that they're beating both G2 and Envy, this was a pretty clear sign. People were asking me, Lawler, how do you feel about who's going to win this regionals? And they were asking me while I was watching Saturday, and I'm like, if Energy keeps playing the way they do, I don't think they're going to lose to anybody. So Energy looked really, really hot. Everybody was kind of clicking. Squishy had massive performance, a lot of solo plays, bumps, demos, you name it. Garrett was hitting shots anytime he needed to from the sidewall, and Justin was just cleanup crew. He would swing through and the ball would fall into his lap, and he would just smack it top right perfectly. So Energy was firing in every capacity, and they looked really freaking good. Space Station still secures 3-1, wins over Peeps, lost to Envy, and G2, their only loss came to Energy, but had to play Frontline, Alpine, and Rogue. As for the rest, everybody in the kind of 2-1 area was really close. You were talking G2 was in there, Envy was in there, Peeps was in there, Alpine, Rogue, Pittsburgh Nut. Like, there was a lot of really solid teams all in the kind of 2-1 area, so they all had to play each other, and was some pretty exciting matches. Actually, regionals this weekend was pretty sick. Ultimately, we take a look at the playoff bracket, and we get our top 8, Kansas City Pioneers versus Alpine, G2 versus Envy, Energy versus XSET, and Space Station versus Peeps. It looks like everything kind of goes as expected. A lot of people would probably give the nod to G2 over Envy, but I do think Envy's defense matches up really well against G2, and you see that here. The game itself is super close, 3-1, 4-2, 1-0, an OT 2-1, and then another 1-0. And I think close scorelines actually really benefit Envy. Their team is not afraid to play defense and slow it down a little bit and then go for the counterattack play. And that works really well against a team like G2 that is super chaotic on offense, a lot of pressure, and you're just kind of hoping for that one chance to break out. So I think Envy does match up pretty well against G2, and they do get the victory there. Kansas City Pioneers, to me, is a top 6, top 7 team, so not really surprised that, to me, they're just a better version of Alpine. Very controlled, chaotic play style, where they have the ability to send the house and overwhelm. Beast Mode is developing into a phenomenal young talent. I think Memory is a perfect addition to this team. I've talked about it numerous weeks, his defense and the control that he gives, and then it just allows Rapid to kind of go for some nutty shots. He has some pretty crazy redirects in that series as well. Energy is absolutely dominant, but the thing that surprised me is that they do end up going to 5. They actually won the first game and then lost 2 and 3, so they had to win 2 in a row to close it out, but XSET put up a pretty good fight. They also have a roster change. For some reason, I've escaped on this one. But XSET is no longer using Alraz. They have brought in T. Carell, and it has been a phenomenal addition. It has been helping out so much. So shout-outs to Alpha Cap and the boys as they continue to progress and move a little bit more forward. I feel like they're feeling pretty confident. So I know they're pretty happy about this. Totally sidetracking, but I actually got to sit down on my watch party, talk with Wonder Mike a little bit, and he's feeling, he's feeling the vibes. He's really happy about what's going on with United and how Tristan has worked in and all the things that are falling into place. So I think United, another team that we've kind of looked past a little bit recently, is going to be a very tough one moving forward, as well as XSET. And then last one, Space Station has been having a rough week and a half or so, and that continues here. Despite making top 8, they do drop to the Peeps, a team that they normally are just a better version of. So Peeps end up moving forward in this one into the semifinals. As we get into the semifinals, Envy versus Kansas City Pioneers. Envy's just a better team. I think that's Kansas City Pioneers' biggest flaw right now, is they're very similar to like a Barcelona or a Oxygen or kind of like a Guild, where they have potential to beat the guys at the top, but they just can't beat that top 4, and they struggle with it. So Envy, one of those top 4 teams, top 3 even, ends up beating Kansas City Pioneers 4-2. And Energy, this is where you're like, yep, okay, Energy wins the whole thing, and they just smack the Peeps 4-0. Obviously, 4-0 doesn't really tell the full story of the series, but you're talking they only allowed Peeps to have 1 goal, and they outscored them 13-1. So yeah, it was pretty scary. They completely shut them out in games 1, 2, and 3, and then in game 4, the ultimate BM, they put them in a Brazil. So yeah, Energy looked really good against the Peeps. It was at that point too that you were like, yep, Energy is really good. I don't foresee them losing. And despite that, they do get a clean sweep in the grand finals for regionals over Envy, but Envy does put up a very valiant attempt. Every single game was a 1-goal differential with 2 OTs, 1 in game 1 and 1 in game 2. So it's not like Energy was an easy walk in the park against Envy, but Envy does put up a good fight and keeps it close throughout the entire series. Really fun grand final, even though it is a sweep. I'll probably go watch that again on stream sometime this week just so I can catch every little detail. But yeah, some really exciting matches. I think regionals overall, I was talking to my Discord about it, and they were just like, yeah, honestly, the games were amazing. The finals was a bit but that's probably because it wasn't as high action and chaotic as we like to see. But again, overall, they said it was pretty cool, and all the quarterfinal matches were phenomenal. So really good weekend of Rocket League. If you guys have made it this far, I greatly appreciate it. Thanks for taking the time to watch the video. I'm actually feeling pretty under the weather today. I've got a really bad migraine coming in, so just trying to get this out for you guys. And obviously, shout outs to my editor for putting this all together and taking care of it so it looks all nice and pretty for y'all, because I just couldn't be bothered to do it myself tonight because I'm just feeling like garbage. So again, if you guys have made it this far, if you guys enjoyed the content, give it a thumbs up. If you don't, thumbs down. Any interaction with the video greatly helps. And if you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop those down below. But that is going to do it for me. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Peace.